U.S. House approved $61 billion in military aid for Ukraine after months of stalling. When I saw this, I realized that it's clear to me that the West will fall. And it's not just because of what the United States did, but after months of wrangling and discussing the downfalls of what was taking place on the geopolitical, on the global scene as it relates to these military interventions and this piling of funds into different conflicts around the world, different hot zones that were not necessarily helping situations but were exacerbating situations. After all of these months of debate, it was clear that the American people were against further aid to Ukraine and against further aid to wars around the world. That it's and when it's polled, it's not just the America First group, it's not just the Free Palestine. Across the board, the American general public is overwhelmingly against the providing of military aid, especially in the situation of Ukraine. But in most of these situations, when we talk about the nature of what's being done in these countries, how these funds are being used, and how they could be better spent at home, the American people across the political spectrum are against this. And yet, and still, with overwhelming support, the politicians in Washington give the middle finger to the voters and to the citizens of the country. And it's clear to me that the political, economic, the leadership of the Western countries have no concern whatsoever about the opinions, the thoughts. They are insulated because of the nature of the structures and systems under which they operate. They have small groups of highly motivated people that they can consistently get reelected by. They are insulated from having to vote or be answered to the masses. These structures that are in play protect them and protect the special interest. And for me, it is clear that the West, because of these factors, will fall. EU military support to Ukraine. I saw this article. Once again, this pumping of support. When you go across Europe, Europe has some serious troubles, serious problems that they are facing in the here and now. Their citizens are struggling with education. Look at the UK. Look at some of the crises that are going on in the UK. My God, it is crumbling. When you go outside of the major cities, what you see is decay. What you see is abandonment. What you see is underinvestment. What you see was once a former proud and great nation just dwindling down to a few cities. What do they care about the people who live outside of London? What do they care about the people who live outside of Paris? Look at the French economy. Look at the German economy. But still and yet they find money to foster the political and the economic interests, not of the masses, but of a few. This war in Ukraine, are the lives of the people in Ukraine who are dying being improved by this aid, by this regime in Ukraine? Do they care about the thousands of men? They could have had a peace deal years ago. But because they had other interests, other economic interests, they were promised certain things would happen and that they would be in the in crowd. They went down a road of tension and friction instead of a road of negotiation. They bombed out these Russian speaking areas. They cut them off from utilities and other resources that these individuals needed to survive. They moved militarized zones because they did not want to be close to Russia, and they found that their economic interest of the elite in Kyiv lied in the West. Fine. Release that portion of the country. Fine. Find a solution to be a non NATO member. But why engage in a war that kills hundreds and thousands of people? And these people that they are rounding up, they are brutalizing and forcing into service. These folks' lives would be no better whether they were under the Western regime or under the Russian regime, the average person's life would not be any better or worse than it already was. So what are they dying for? It's clear to me that the politicians don't care about the economic, the physical, the well-being of any of the people in the West. They care about themselves. And because of that reason, the West will fall. The failure of political systems to have any concern whatsoever for the interest and the opinions of those it governs is a pattern as old as time. We can look at all of the empires that have come and gone, and they have the same pattern of hatred. Really, I hate to go that far, but it seems like there's a hatred of elected officials for the opinions. You're stupid. You're too incompetent to understand that what we're doing and why we're doing it. This is not the nanny state. This is the pappy state. You're an idiot. You can't figure it out. So we're going to do what you say you don't want us to do because we know better than you. And we're going to focus our resources on everything but making your life better. Everything but dealing with the cost of education. Everything but we send money to countries that have surpluses in their debt, surpluses in their budget. We're sending them money. They have universal health care, universal education. They've got universal this and that. Their lives are infinitely better than the people here in America. And here we go, another billion for you, a billion for you, a billion for you. No, I'm not saying that Donald Trump was right, but I am saying that there has to be a come to Jesus moment where we realize that, hey, there are significant problems here in the United States that require the attention and the resources. You've got crumbling infrastructure. They don't care. Same thing throughout Europe. Don't care. Look at the Mongol Empire. Came and went. British Empire, the Russian Empire, the Roman Empire, the Austrian Empire, and I'm just picking out some of the ones, the Holy Roman Empire, some of the empires that are familiar to the masses. And the fact of the matter is that they've come and gone. The Byzantine Empire, they've come and gone, but they all shared the similar patterns that we are seeing emerge right now in the West. I want to give you 4 reasons the West will fall. This Western bloc, as well as this U.S.-led approach to foreign policy and global domination, it will fall. It will be like that. You know, they used to say there's never a place where the sun doesn't set on the British Empire. That's not the case anymore. It crumbled because of these 4 reasons. 1, low economic growth. You see that in all of the declining empires. Their growth began to slow. Their economies began to struggle. And they struggle for a lot of reasons, but some of the reasons they struggle was primarily, the primary reason they struggle is because of lack of focus on the needs and well-being of the people. Look at what's going on in the EU. Look at what's going on in the G7. This is a chart of G7 economic growth for 2023. UK was in recession at the end of 2023. But yet and still, they were giving money to go overseas to adventurous projects and to imperialism and to military bases and interventions. They were still funding operations and covert operations around the globe, participating in bombings of countries that had not bombed Britain, had not bombed the UK at all, had not fired on the UK at all, but the UK was still excited to be a part of against the will of the people. The people did not want this, but they were so excited to be a part of these bombing campaigns, killing innocent people in countries that had not killed anyone. When it came to Yemen, Yemen had not killed anyone, but the UK was excited. Let's go bomb and kill. While the people in the UK are saying, wait a minute. Why can't we invest some of these resources into fixing our education system that used to be free, but now, the people who benefited from free education are now taking it away from the next generation, saying that they can afford to pay. Let's invest something in our healthcare system where people are waiting months and years for procedures. Let's invest something into our crumbling infrastructure. All of the municipalities and cities that once had hospitals and once had other vibrant attractions going down the tube. Look at the Eurozone as a whole. They had limited, if any, growth last year. USA had some growth last year, but I think much of that was growth that sponsored by stimulus spending by the administration in one way or another, this constant pumping of government funds into the economy, this constant driving of federal debt and deficits. Yeah, you see growth, but how long can you print money? How long can you borrow? What's going on in Japan? Japan was in recession. Germany, no growth, could have been in recession, missed it by a very little bit, may now be in recession. France, nothing to show for. All of Macron's traveling around the world, his pompous bloviating from one group to another of what they should do and what they need to do in order to make the world better. Maybe his time would have been better focusing on the farmers, focusing on the construction workers, focusing on the French economy. The slow growth issue is this. When we look at GDP numbers, they often are misleading. They would let you think that, okay, look, 9.8% of the population, that's great. GDP, almost 40% of the world's GDP represented by 10%. Those countries have to be doing great. The people in those countries have to be doing great. And that's where we make our mistake. We measure the stability of these countries by the GDP, but not by the quality of life of the residents, not by the purchasing power of the countries. When you adjust for purchasing power, you'll see that the BRICS nations were at one point behind, but have caught up. Because when we adjust for inflation and we adjust for the cost of goods and services in country, the BRICS nations have outpaced the G7. And that's an alarming thing, considering that the BRICS nations' growth rate is faster than most of the nations in the G7. And so this purchasing power parity is going to continue to shift towards the global south. Yellen warns China's industry ramp up is distorting world economy. What in the world are they talking about? You're going to go to China and tell them not to produce stuff? You're going to go to China? I just saw an article the other day. They're sending Blinken to China to tell the Chinese that they should not sell dual purpose supplies and materials to Russia, and that they should buy more American debt. How can you go to another nation and dictate to them? You think that you're going to dictate to China at the same time you're building bases on their border? You think you're going to dictate to China at the same time you're giving money to? It's a helter-skelter global policy of antagonization and then trying to get people to do what you want through bullying, and it has not worked. It is a time and time again, empires believe that the only tool in their toolbox is pressure tactics, military intervention, and global dominance. And that comes at a high cost. And the cost of trying to maintain bases all around the world and then trying to negotiate with these countries who feel their security threatened, feel the pressure campaigns, it's a dying proposition. Almost half of industrial robots are in China. We talk about what's going on and why the West is going to have headwinds. It's not just China. My goodness, look at India's growth rate. India's growth rate is astronomical. The global South have countries that are growing, that are investing in robotics, investing in technology, and they are not held back by some of the impediments in the West, the impediments of racism, the impediments of inequality, the impediments of classism and the impediments that come from regional divisions. They're investing in education, investing in technology, and they are not being held back by some of the inherent sins of America. You know, American education system has constantly been plagued where those who live in some areas have a certain type of education and those in another have a different type of education. And what it leaves is the inability to harness the human capital of all of the citizens of the country in order to compete on a global stage. And we look around and we say, well, wait a minute. We're falling behind in production. We're falling behind in manufacturing. We're falling behind in electric, in green technologies. How China's car companies built so wide a lead in the race to make EVs. All of a sudden, people are waking up and saying, wait a minute, we're falling behind in this race for electric vehicles. Nobody wants these $100,000 vehicles, these F1 Lightnings, and we don't have anything to do about it. We try to force them to buy them, but they don't. The initial market was great, but you're going to run out of people who've got $100,000 to plop down on some high overpriced. People who buy pickup trucks, by and large, want a pickup truck. They want a work truck. The real market for work trucks are workers. The people who are styling and profiling with their pickup truck, that's a small market. And once you've extended that market and you've gone through it, who else is going to buy these vehicles? And so they're losing billions of dollars because they made overpriced vehicles. Their technology is not up to par. Their processes are not up to par. When you look at manufacturing, this is one of the things that I think Blinken should be very careful about. You go over and anger China. Yeah, Russia might be able to make 200 tanks a year to replenish battlefield losses. If they can make 200, China could make 2,000. China's manufacturing. Look at the manufacturing of the world. China is outpacing. Other countries are growing, and the United States and the G7 and the Western nations, when you begin to look at what they are able to provide to the global economy, and especially in terms of military production, when you look at what they would be able to provide in a conflict towards replenishing and to expanding weapon stocks, the West no longer has a clear picture of could they, if the rest of the world, if the global South band together, could the West keep pace in a conflict economically, and could the West keep pace in a conflict militarily with the military industries of these countries growing? Let's talk about another issue, the reason why I think great empires, great alliances crumble, and that's inequality. I already alluded to it a little bit. If you're watching this, I want to ask if you would follow the program, if you like the program, if you share our program so that we could grow our platform. I really do appreciate you guys watching and tuning in and giving your time to the channel. These are the American bases around the world. These are the American bases that taxpayers, some unwittingly, some knowingly and despisingly, if that's a word, some are contributing to. The American people hate that their tax dollars is going to militarize the world. They don't want to be the global policeman. They don't want to be funding. They've got issues at home, issues of great inequality, issues of difficulties with living and raising children, and they see their dollars. It's the same thing with all of the other Western nations, this imperialist mindset where our resources are being used abroad and used in a way that create frictions and tensions. Let China have their sphere of influence. Let Russia have their sphere of influence. Let South Africa have its sphere of influence. Let us worry about us for a change. Let us use the monies that we give in taxes to make our lives better. And no matter how many people yell this from the rooftops, the politicians don't care. The leaders in the White House and in the governments and 10 Downings, they don't care. They have no concern whatsoever about the well being, because if they did, they would use the resources at their disposal to improve the lives of the people, not acquire debt. You're printing money so you can give it away to conflicts around the world. Look at this. You pull this up. While you're giving away these funds against the will of the people, you look at the condition and capacity of the American infrastructure in particular, and you see that very less than half of the roads and infrastructure in the United States is up to par. The rest of it is poor, mediocre, fair. You mean to tell me that we couldn't use these funds here at home? You look at the rising cost of college education. You don't mean to tell me that something couldn't be done? You look at the poverty rates. You look at the scenes on the major cities throughout this country, the homelessness rate. And I'm not, a lot of times when we talk about homeless, we think, oh, lazy bums. I'm talking about veterans who served this country, who are now living on the streets. They deserve these resources. I'm talking about seniors who worked a life and now are trying to live off of this meager pensions and these scam pensions that they received and live off of Social Security. They deserve more. I'm talking about children who have not harmed anyone, who have not had a chance yet to give a full account of who they will be and what contributions they can make to society. Look at them. Look at them. You mean to tell me there's nowhere in America that could use $61 billion? There's no city, there's no rural country, the rural county in Appalachia who's suffering from lack of health care, lack of infrastructure, lack of investment that could have benefited from these funds. The politicians don't care. And it's that type of growing inequality, the Davos crowd. The Davos crowd is trying to make money. The Davos crowd is trying to prop up their economic interests and expand their global control. They're going to use the citizens as soldiers, as pawns in this game to fund, to fight. I think we could correct the whole thing. If you want to send money to a military conflict and you're an elected official, you have to leave office and go fight there. You have to send your children to fight on the front line. No signing up for the Navy, no signing up for the Air Force. You have to sign up for infantry frontline fighters. If you can't do that, then you shouldn't be able to send money and other people to die for a war that you yourself would never fight in. Term limits. We could solve much of the West problem just by having term limits. We could solve much of the West problem by giving the people the opportunity not to vote in these ridiculously drawn lines that ensure re-election, but giving the people to vote at large, whether to throw these bums out of office. We could solve a lot of our problems by age limits. These guys, they're fighting the Cold War. They're fighting wars that long have been over. They're trying to create global, relive the heyday. And they're doing it in a way that is ruining the lives of generations that have yet to be born. We could solve some of our problems if we would just create a process that every bill that is voted on has to be a single issue bill. Why is it that you're putting TikTok in the same bill as military aid? What do those things have to do with each other? Everything should stand on its own. Every single bill should be a single issue bill. None of this bargaining, none of this voted up and down. We could solve some of these problems, but the systems are structured in a way to create the biggest sanctioned corruption scheme in the history of humanity. And while the people are looking for change, nothing is changed because the systems have been created and built over years to insulate these scoundrels from the opinions and retribution from the people who they were elected to serve, but who they despise and hate. Look at the Housing Affordability Index. In the United States, housing over the decades have become less and less affordable. The median family income is going nowhere, but housing prices are shooting through the roof. You're making the same amount. Yes, In numerical value, you're making more than what you were 40 years ago. But in purchasing power, when this is adjusted for inflation, Americans have made no more money. So while the GDP is growing, it doesn't affect the wealth and the income. These scoundrels have created a system to where all of the gains of technology, all of the gains of industry, all of the growth and economic capacity has gone to the same elite. The Davos crowd has extracted all of that wealth from the system and left the masses with nothing, with pennies. We are paupers in their system of exploitation. They get all of the new gain. Worker productivity has gone up tenfold, but worker salaries are the same as they were 40 years ago when adjusted for inflation. So what does that mean? That means that all of that increased productivity went to who? The benefits of the increased productivity didn't go to the workers. It went to the Davos crowd, the elites, the owners. We can't measure the growth and the stability of the West by GDP. It can't be measured by the stock market, Wall Street, or the financiers in London. It's got to be measured by the health and vitality of the average family. And as that health and vitality continue to decline, continue to see themselves on the hamster wheel going nowhere, there will be upheaval. The average credit card balance in the United States jumped 10% to a record $6,360, and more consumers fall behind on payments. And at the same time that the consumers are hurting, that they're assuming debt, they can't buy homes, their paychecks aren't increasing relative to inflation, guess what's happening? They're sending money all around the world. And it's not just the United States. Look at the EU. Energy prices keep climbing in the EU. Monthly rate of inflation in terms of electricity, gas, liquid fuels. There's something called energy poverty throughout the EU where people are not able to purchase the needed energy in order to fuel their businesses, but also in order to heat their homes. You look throughout the EU and you find instances where there are people who are struggling. They're chopping down wood in the backyard like this was the Middle Ages to heat their homes. And yet the European countries can send money across the world for this global conflict and this ridiculous scheme and this other ridiculous scheme, one after another, one conflict after another. And never does it make the average person's life better. So why are you using my resources to fight some war so that the elites can have access to new markets, access to new places to exploit the workers and laborers of new countries? What does that have to do with me? Do it on your own dime. That's my thing. You don't want to spend your money, so you put the taxpayers on the hook. Look at this, pensioner poverty. Look at the UK. Look at the UK, look at France. The leading countries talking about more war, more killing, more genocide, more export of resources abroad to engage in foolish adventures. At the same time, the people who have worked to build these countries, the people who have worked decades and decades living on the streets, the people who have worked decades and decades, it hurts my heart to see a senior citizen standing at the door of Walmart. Not because they need something to do, but because that's the only way they can put food on the table is they're working in their late 60s and early 70s and late 70s, standing there trembling, just trying to hold on to the shopping cart as they push it away to give to the customer. And they say, "Welcome to Walmart." Is that really what we want in our golden age? Is that really what we imagine that retirement would look like? But in the West, that's okay. They've got plenty of money for this adventure and this war and that war. They can send it to bomb this country and that country, and they're okay with that. They don't care what you're going through. And that's one of the reasons I think the West will fall. Reason 3, the rise of multipolarity. Russia plans to usher in a new world order. More powers are signing up. One of the problems you have is when you go around the world as a global bully. You don't try to negotiate and resolve. You try to use military power. What you find out is that military power has its limits. And once you've done it enough, you create a situation where the enemy of my enemy becomes my friend. And the West has created enemies all throughout the world because they sought not to engage in fair trade, not to engage in capitalism. They sought to engage in exploitation backed by military intervention and coups. And doing that enough over a period of time has led the global South to see who they really are and what their interests really are. And the fact that they're still doing it in 2024, the fact that when issues come, nonsensical issues come to the Security Council and come to the UN and come to the institutions that were created to create global peace and prosperity, you see the West intervening in ways that defy the imagination and prove their hypocrisy. And as such, the global South will move. They are moving towards new processes, new economic infrastructure for the transactions and for cross-border trade. 30 new countries prepared to join alliance in 2024. Countries are moving away from the Western-led because it says rules-based order, but who makes the rules is the problem, and who becomes the referee of those rules. It's not the rules themselves that are bad. It's the fact that they're only employed in instances where you're aligned politically or militarily with the West. The people in the eastern part of Ukraine didn't have the right to self-defense, but the people in other parts of the globe who are aligned with the West do have the right to self-defense. The people of Palestine don't have the right to self-defense, but the people of other places do have the right to self-defense. It's not the rules themselves that are fraudulent. It's that the referee is corrupt. And whenever you have a system where the referee is corrupt, individuals will seek to exit that system to find different balances. And that's essentially what's going to happen. A new power center is emerging, and out of that new power center, there will be a new balance. And the new balance will enable the rules to be employed in a system where there are more than one referee. Leaders of 23 nations officially expressed a desire to join BRICS. Nations all over the world are looking from the global South. They've seen themselves be exploited, being shut out. They've seen the systems being manipulated, the printing of money, the use of sanctions, the hypocrisy and the use of force against countries that have not attacked any NATO member. NATO is an offensive alliance. They see themselves being shut out, and they also, even those nations that were aligned with the West. You know, one thing about global politics and life in general, success breeds success. And as nations see the train leaving the station, even if they were aligned with the West, they're going to try to jump on board to what comes next. BRICS prepares to launch currency in 2024. This is a major shift. And the BRICS currency is not so much a currency as it is a digital payment window through which individuals can use countries can use and individuals, as a matter of fact, can use their native currencies to execute trade cross-border. And that's going to be a major boon for the global economy and for the global South. And it's going to hit the West like a ton of bricks because they have always been able to extract undue resources out of the global South by forcing the issue of the US dollar, making the dollar the king and the reserve currency. Individuals had to trade out of their local currencies and into the dollar at a loss of GDP, and oftentimes it made it more difficult to service the debts that those countries had, as well as to acquire goods and services. If you can use your local currency to do that, not only does it strengthen your local economy, it strengthens your local currency, and it eliminates some of the high fees and transaction costs associated with debt and the currency exchanges. And that's going to be a major problem for the United States. The United States and the West, their economies are based upon advantage. We talk about being exemplary, but it's only exemplary when you're playing on an even and level playing field. You're not exceptional when you've got an advantage. If we are running a race and you're have to run it on your hands and I can use my legs, and I say at the end when I win I'm exceptional, what's exceptional about that? We're not running the same race. Yes, we may be going through the same track, but you're being hampered by the system itself that I created. And then I'm going to say, look, I'm exceptional. Well, what happens when those advantages no longer exist? The strength of the global South will rise. Look at this. Putin calls for closer Russia-China cooperation on military satellites and prospective weapons. It's not just a coalescing economically that is going to create this multipolar world. It's a coalescing militarily. One of the things reason why I say I did a video not too long on the strategic victory, regardless of what happens on the battlefield in Ukraine. Let's put a hypothetical out there. Let's say Russia was to lose the war, lose all the territory, and the borders were to return to where they were before the war started. Russia still would have already won. It's not about the tactical victory. And we get so caught up in the tactical victory that we don't look at the global issue. The world has seen the hypocrisy. The world has seen the sanctions. The world has seen the stealing of reserves. My goodness, why would you go to China and tell them to buy more US dollars and to invest more in America when you have just seized $300 billion plus of Russian national reserves? That was considered untouchable until this current Biden administration's rogue kind of Toucan Sam diplomacy and international just shoot 'em up mindset, warring mindset, warmonger mindset. That was considered untouchable, and the reason that Obama and other administrations wouldn't do it is because they realized that it would create a chain reaction. Who wants to use a currency? Who wants to have their money in a reserve currency where if they fall out of favor with the country, their reserves are going to be stolen? What You'd have to be the stupidest country in the world to keep your money in the US dollar long term, knowing that at a moment's notice they could come in and take your money and reappropriate to any cause that the administration wanted. You can't tell China you need to continue to buy and continue to have larger. They're buying gold. They're buying other assets as a reserve, as a hedge. Yes, they still have dollars and dollar assets, but they are moving away from their holdings of dollars. And it's not just China, it's countries around the world. And America is looking for people to buy its debt, but at the same time, they're saying, wait a minute, not only are you putting sanctions and export bans on us, not only are you building bases around us, but you're telling us we need to buy your debt. You've got to be crazy. The West has no clear strategy for the global scene, and especially not a global scene where others are allied together, powerful allies forming a base, Russia, China, Iran, others forming a powerful base to the global South's move away from the United States as a military partner and as an economic partner. The China, Russia, Iran maritime drills send signal to West that they are going to come together and create a new military bloc. This was not a bloc that had to exist. This was a bloc that was created out of necessity, a bloc that is created because the United States continues to move bases on the borders of foreign nations against their will, with the notion that these are defense installations, but they often have an offensive purpose. And you don't have to go very far to see these interventions that were foolhardy. Iraq, Libya, all over. I mean, you could just go around the world and just name interventions where bombings took place, where military, Syria. Why is it that the United States has bases in Syria against the Syrian people's will? Explain that to me, how you can stay. You say it's a rules-based order. What rules allow another country to establish a military base in a third country without its permission, without its consent? And they've asked you to leave, but you say we're going to stay. Explain that to me. Explain that how that works. Explain how that you can claim that to be rule. So this iron triangle, this new power center that is fueling the global South's military and economic desires, is one built mainly out of necessity. Iran did not seek to become partners with Russia, but it was the pulling out of the nuclear treaties, it was the imposing of sanctions that now has created an opposition, and an opposition that moves very strategically. Iran has proven that they are no dummies. Iran has proven that they move very, very, very strategically with this response to the bombing of their embassy. They're proving that they can calibrate in ways that prevent greater conflict, but at the same time engage in activities that build their economy and build their military power to the point where one day soon, this Iran, China, Russia, trifecta will grow to a power where they will be able not just to be the backbone militarily of a global coalition, but to oppose, even through force, the will of the United States. And when I say oppose even through force, it's not about attacking or going on offensive campaigns. It's about being able to stand for what you stand for and know that there's no military intervention that can force you to change your political, your geopolitical views and progress. And that's all these countries need to achieve in order to create this multipolar world, is to maintain or to develop enough defense capacity to where they cannot be attacked, they cannot be pressured, they cannot be, coups cannot be fostered, funding of opposition groups and military campaigns, that they become stable and insulated against sanctions. They don't need to have offensive capacity. They just need to have sufficient defensive capacity to level the playing field enough to where the only tools are those of negotiation and diplomacy. And in that environment, with the history that the West has, it's going to be in trouble because much of its wealth, much of its abilities are centered around the not having a level playing field on the global stage. France is centered its economy around, for decades, the ability to exploit countries in the Sahel and to extract resources for the benefit of the elites, and in some instances, society as a whole. The United States has centered its economy around the ability to use the dollar and sanctions and bans and pressure techniques to prevent others from reaching economic parity and to prevent them from competing and being able to surpass it. What happens when those tactics are no longer plausible, no longer capable? Can the West create a strategy for operating in a multipolar world? Can the West create coherent policies that benefit the lives and the well-beings of its citizens? Can they recalibrate what they're doing in order to compete in a new world that is not designed in the way the old world was? You know, we see a lot of tactics by the West: sanctions, bans, military interventions, coups, pressure campaigns. We see all of these tactics, but what has not emerged is any strategy whatsoever, any long-term view of what the world is becoming, what the world will be, and a way in which to operate in this world with the notion of how the world is changing. We complain about China, and their 2025 manufacturing push, but the West didn't create one. We complain about the militarization and the military expansion in Iran. What is the plan in the West to deal with a nuclear Iran? Is it nuclear war? Is it bombing? Is it World War III? What is the plan? You know, we pulled out of the treaty, but what was the plan after the treaty? There was no plan. It was just tactics. The West lacks coherent thinking strategizers who can help us create strategies, not just internally, but globally, to advance the interests of the people and to advance the interests of the country. What they have is strategy, tactics that are employed in a short-term way. Look at the Iraq War. Look at that, for example. Only thing they did was move Iraq closer to Iran, kill 1 million people, turn the whole region into a basket case for years, create ISIS, and then pull out and say we're going to wash our hands of the whole scenario. They didn't do anything but made Iran stronger. There was no strategy at play. It was just a tactical decision. And as long as you're going from one tactical decision to another without a strategy, you're guaranteed to lose. Any chess player will tell you that. The other issue that we have to see is this overextension, this overextending of the United States. The United States, it's clear to me that the reason the U.S. put massive pressure on Israel not to respond in Israel's normal way is because the cost of maintaining air defense is quite high. $1 billion spent in a couple hours is not sustainable, especially not when the other side is spending in the millions and you're spending in the billions. And it's not sustainable when you have multiple conflicts going on around the world. Yes, you have Russia and Ukraine in conflict, but what would happen if China and Taiwan eventually decided, China eventually decided that they were done playing footsie with the United States and moved in militarily? What you would see is a situation where the production capacity in the West cannot handle air defense systems at being under attack at this level. The Ukrainian air defense, and we did a video on that, I guess it was a short, talking about the collapse of the Ukrainian air defense system. The air defense system in Ukraine is struggling. The air defense system in Israel, both cannot be under attack at the same time. And then you add a third possible conflict or a fourth possible conflict. The United States cannot produce enough Patriot missiles to sustain, especially not at a cost of the opposition spending a couple million and the U.S. spending billions, and the rest of the EU economically is not in a position to just continue to pour the same amount of resources into this conflict. If you remove the U.S. from any of these conflicts, it's a house of cards. The whole thing crumbles. These economies are not strong enough to maintain without the U.S.'s intervention. And the U.S. is clear about what their capacities are. You talk about this war was designed to weaken Russia. Well, from a military standpoint, it seems as if Russia has achieved the opposite goal of weakening and exposing the West's lack of capacity as it pertains to the development of munitions, artillery shells, Patriot systems, air defense systems. And that's a situation that, when this war does end, and Russia and China begin to ramp up their cooperation militarily, and Iran is in that mix, and other countries are in that mix. Once the coast is clear and this war ends, the disadvantage that the West has in the production of munitions is going to skyrocket, because I can only imagine what happens when China really goes into full production capacity, when the sanctions and some of the other pressure is lifted, and they begin to move to empower their allies and strengthen their allies. This thing is going to heat up. I don't know if it will be World War III, but a multipolar world is not going to be good for the West, because it's already has its internal and external problems. And in a multipolar world, the advantage that is gained from exploiting the global systems will no longer exist. And without that advantage, can the West compete on a level playing field? Can it bargain fairly for goods and services? Will it be able to sell products fairly? Will when the African franc no longer exist and the Sahel region is freed from the grips of France, and other parts of the world are freed from their former colonial overlords, what will happen? What will happen to those countries when now, if they want natural resources, they'll have to pay market price? They won't be able to manipulate the systems. there is no sign that the leadership we currently have is prepared, has thought about, and created a strategy to exist and cooperate without the use of military intervention and other underhanded tactics in a multipolar world where the rules are applied equally across the playing field. We don't have any evidence that that will occur at this time. We'll have to wait and see what will happen. As always, why